And welcome to African Literature. Today we're reading a Pacesetter's series book titled Too Cold for Comfort by Jide Oguntoye. Chapter 1. Hannah Ologun and Kolade Omola had been courting for some time, and they were at last preparing to marry. But although their wedding arrangements had been made, Kolade was far from sure that he could look forward to a happy married life. His fears were caused by the rigid principles which Hannah adhered to, principles which in his judgment could easily make her become domineering. He had often thought of going back on his marriage proposal, but he was restrained by one thing, the irresistible beauty of Hannah. She was a light-complexioned, dazzling young woman whose face was always full of hope and love. Well, I think this was written in the time when light complexion was a plus. We now know that all complexions are a plus. But anyway, going back to the book, she had only to smile at Colade to make him forget his fears and to evoke in him dreams of soon being the much envied husband. Colade's friends had talked jealously of Hannah's beauty, of her seductive eyes and the curve of her mouth, and he realized that he could not hope to find a more attractive wife. Hannah would win any beauty contest no matter what the judges were looking for. What would they consider? If hips, she possessed an alluring pair. If legs, hers were perfectly formed, long, upright, smooth, and free from scars. And she was well educated, a staff nurse, a daughter of a retired nursing officer, and she knew what it meant to be smart, fluent in her speech, and mindful of the way she dressed. If only our marriage can stick, he said to himself, battling to suppress some of the qualms which he still felt. He ran his eyes over the cartons of beer which cluttered his sitting room. Only 4 days more and the wedding would take place. The bottles would soon be emptied by the guests, and by the end of that day too, his bedroom would have been cleared of the bags of powdered yam, gari, and yams. What a great, great Saturday will be. What a great, great day Saturday will be. He smiled to himself in anticipation, clapped his hands against the arms of the chair, and stretched his legs out on a stool. Still smiling, he sank back into the chair and proudly surveyed his parlour. To his satisfaction, it now looked adorned enough for his queen, Hannah. New carpets, new poufs, new blinds, and a set of well-arranged chairs. Only a few days previously he had brought in his new refrigerator, which was now humming beside the dining table. But as he glanced at the dining table, he was reminded of a potential test to his marital faithfulness. Wrapped in a napkin on the table was a plate of hot rice, richly dressed with vegetables, meat, and eggs. The food had been brought in by Jogo Ajay, a girl in her late teens, an apprentice in the textile trade run by her aunt, Mrs. Titi Ajepe. They lived in the next street to Kolade and hailed from Kolade's town. Mrs. Ajepe had come to Ibadan in the early 60s and took up the job of a housemaid. The story of her early life in the city remained always fresh in her mind. How she arrived wretched and unsophisticated, how she caught the fancy of Chief Bade Ajepe, who literally bought her into marriage. How she had refused to give in to the overtures of the chief since she was not prepared to be his sixth wife, but had stepped down upon the offer of a furnished flat in one of his houses. How he had given her a large textile shop into the bargain. It was because of her experiences that she came to approve of the affair between Jogo and Kolade. She ought to have been pessimistic about the possibility of marriage between Jogo, a semi-illiterate, and Kolade, a senior teacher, but she had learned to allow destiny to rule people, and her niece was not an exception. As she herself had been treated kindly by fate, so might Jogo. She knew Jogo had a rival in the person of a beautiful young staff nurse, but she had followed the course of the affair closely and had satisfied herself that a large portion of Kolade's heart was reserved for Jogo. Kolade himself had played safe enough. He had introduced Jogo to Hannah as his cousin and Hannah to Jogo and Mrs. Ajepe as his fiancée. He had told Jogo about his decision to marry Hannah while assuring her that she would be generously compensated for her love for him. Hannah had no reason to disbelieve the professed blood relationship between Jogo and Kolade, since Jogo perfectly played the role of a cousin whenever she was around. Kolade and Hannah paid visits, purportedly to Mrs. Titi Ajepe, at which Jogo played the service girl to the couple. They were accompanied to Elijo by the same Jogo on the day Hannah was being formally introduced to Kolade's parents, and the young girl had been the loudest in her encouragement when Pa Omola had been reluctant to approve his son's marriage to Hannah. Pa Omola had argued that an Egba girl could not be an ideal wife. He enumerated his reasons and summed up that a girl from Elijo town or Ekiti division would be more acceptable to the family. Jogo promptly took the defense upon herself, telling the elders who dominated the gathering that the proposed marriage was absolutely safe since both Kolade and Hannah were educated and gainfully employed. The elders, she pleaded, should not attempt to drag the young ones back to their own days. The story of the three-way relationship was a strange one, and Kolade now felt the past should be put aside. As he looked at the dining table, he had also noticed the knitted furniture covers that Hannah had brought on her last visit. He could picture the visit now. He was there on the same seat when she had come in, balancing two heavy shopping bags. "Learning weightlifting?" he had asked her, jocularly, rushing forward to offer her help. "Weightlifting for your sake," she had replied, radiating with smile. He remembered now as he had sat back to watch in appreciation as Hannah unloaded the bags, thinking of the trouble she had taken to purchase those things among the swarms of people at Dugbe Market: oranges, guava, grapes, bananas, soup, ingredients, and of course the pieces of knitting. "You can freeze the fruits and keep them longer," she had said, focusing her smile on him. Kolade remembered how he had suddenly felt a flood of love for her as she had stood upright for a moment, projecting her buttocks and bosom before turning to adorn the seats and stools with the knitting. The taste of the soup she had cooked that day seemed to linger still on his palate. That was one of those days on which he had tried to physically demonstrate his love for Hannah, but on which she, true to type, played hard to get. "Less than 2 weeks, and I'll be yours forever," she had said, warning Kolade against ungodly acts. He had dutifully apologized to her, but had thought himself lucky that Jogo was not yet entirely out of it. And now the wedding was only 4 days away, and Kolade was inclined to accept that Hannah had been right and that it would have been stupid to pressurize her. Lack of patience could spoil things, he decided. He praised his decision to exercise that reticence. Sprang up from his seat, and moved towards the door leading to the parlor. There he stepped on the raffia-made footmat, which had also been brought by Hannah on that last visit. "Oh, devoted lover," he remarked, looking down at the mat. On it was inscribed, "Jesus saves." He had seen and read it before, and again this time he was reading it with his usual contempt for what he called small-mindedness. "Am I going to stand for this fanaticism?" he asked himself. "I hope she doesn't insist on that dreadful religious doggedness." Turning away from the footmat, he caught sight of the plate of rice on the dining table once more and moved towards it. "Must have been getting cold," he said, feeling sorry about his diminishing interest in Jogo. Jogo would have been the ideal wife for him, but for her educational inadequacies. It would not be prestigious to marry a primary school dropout. Although Jogo was sexy and fashionable, she could not match Hannah in beauty. If Hannah could only turn out to be as amorous as Jogo had proved to be, he would be the luckiest man on earth. If not, his wedding would definitely be a farce. End of chapter 1.